So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ville-Veiko Pulkka, and as you may see, I work for the Finnish National Insurance Institution, Kela. Currently, I work with the preparations of the Finnish basic income experiment, but today I won't concentrate on this topic. Today I will talk about my PhD research on digital working life and its possible implications for labor and with what kind of links it might have to basic income discussion. So, firstly, I'm going to present to you two fundamentally different but important scenarios on digital working life. I call this time is different scenario, and this time is no different. The first one accepts that or forecasts that there will be big changes in employment, perhaps mass in unemployment. And the second one, this time is no different scenario, expects that nothing will change in the long term. So maybe the employment changes a bit, but nothing crucial. I'm also presenting a critical evaluation of these fundamentally different scenarios. This critical evaluation could be also called a scenario, but today I call it critical evaluation. And I use this evaluation as a basis for my analysis on basic income. So the second part concentrates on basic income and its connection to digital working life. And I'm trying to answer whether basic income addresses the most probable risks of digital economy or digital working life. I'm also trying to ask whether the digital working life make basic income politically more feasible. So could it be perhaps easier to implement if we frame it in this context? And then in the end, of course, some conclusions. I think I won't use more than 45 minutes for my presentation, so we have more time to discuss if you have any questions. And of course, if you don't understand something what I'm saying, just raise your hand, you can stop me. That's okay. So I think most of you may have seen that there has been extensive global discussion on the possible implications of digital technologies and artificial intelligence for labor. There is consensus on some things. I think most of the commentators are expecting big changes, some sort of great transformation. Most of the commentators believe that routine and predictable jobs or tasks are at automation risk or at high automation risk. And most of the commentators also believe that in the near future, flexible labor with social skills are in demand. However, there is no consensus on one thing, and that is long-term estimates on what will happen in labor markets. Even though there is no consensus on the long-term estimates, this whole discussion on this topic has led to renaissance of basic income discussion in several countries. Good example is referendum in Switzerland that was in June 2016, so just a few months ago. Basic income advocates used digital working life or the future working life as an argument why basic income should be implemented. Also interesting group of advocates is venture capitalists in the US. This group of advocates have been really active, and one example how we can see this is basic income experiment, which is under planning in Oakland, California, and which is planned to start also in January 2017, or the pilot phase, bigger phase in 2018. Well, what is interesting, this is not the first time when basic income is framed with this automation or the end of work discussion. Not the same, but same kind of discussion has been has been going on actually since the 1960s. So most of the arguments which are now given are the same we had heard already in the 1960s. For example, Martin Luther King Jr. used automation, or cybernation was the word those days, to frame the need for a unconditional minimum income for everyone. What is interesting is that in Finland this discussion hasn't been that important. There are some commentators, but most politicians do not frame basic income or the basic income experiment with the automation discourse. In Finland, the emphasis has been on how to remove these incentives in social security, so how to make work always pay, and how to increase labor supply. So it's been pretty opposite to the international discussion in many countries. And this is I think this is interesting because Finland is relying on innovation-based growth model, which means that this discourse should be quite important one in Finland too. So some sort of methodological starting point for this time is different scenario might be this kind of occupation-based approach. Carl Frey and Michael A. Osborne published a study in 2013. It was some kind of starting point for the whole discussion on technological unemployment, which is, by the way, a concept popularized by John Maynard Keynes in 1930, so already 90 years ago or 95 years ago. Well, according to Frey and Osborne's analysis, almost half the jobs in the US will be at high risk of automation over the next 2 decades. In this study, they look at average content, important issues, average content of 702 occupations at a technological level. So average content at a technological level. And according to their analysis, low-paid and low-education jobs are the most threatened ones. It's interesting because many commentators have been emphasizing this time. Also middle-class jobs may disappear. And this has been trend according to many statistics, but what will happen in the future is of course different question. The same methodology was also employed in Finland 1 year later, and according to these 2 Finnish scholars, Pajarinen and Rouvinen, also 1/3 of the Finnish jobs might be automated or are at high risk of automation over the next 2 decades. One European think tank called Bruegel also employed same kind of methodology. They had a little bit more aggregated classification of occupations, which means that these results may be quite biased. According to this analysis, anyway, 54% of European Union jobs are at risk of automation. Well, in general, the arguments are not based on this sophisticated methodology, and if we think the scenario, the most important argument is usually so-called Moore's law, which means that this time, in comparison to the other earlier industrial revolutions, the development is exponential and stable. What this means? This means especially that machines can handle more demanding manual, and not just manual but also cognitive tasks, which means or translates into less tasks for people. This means also that the labor has less or even no time to adjust by education. Earlier industrial revolutions, or the answer for these earlier industrial revolutions, was education, and with the help of education the long-term employment effects have not been negative. Well, if we believe in this analysis based on Moore's law, we should also expect that the cooperation between machines and people will be just temporary. So people may find new jobs may be generated, but these jobs are just temporary. Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee may be the most prominent digital working life commentators from MIT. US have been writing that there is no actually any iron law, even though the earlier industrial revolutions ended up quite well. There is no any iron law that new jobs will be generated. We have also some cases, especially social media companies, which kind of show that the new production is also more capital intensive, which means that they may generate a lot of wealth, but they may not need that much employment. Let's say Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, they don't employ that many workers in comparison to some old industrial firms in the last decades. Brynjolfsson and McAfee have been also talking about so-called great decoupling, which means that even though productivity rises, employment doesn't anymore. So the link has broken between productivity and employment. Then some of you might have heard about platform economy. I think this is also part of this scenario. I think everybody has heard at least about Uber, which means basically that different digital platforms makes it possible to dismantle work into smaller cells. And many commentators have been arguing that this may be the new normal. And if this is the case, then of course it means more insecure labor markets for the people who need to participate in labor markets using these platforms. Okay, everybody knows Uber, but then if you Google, for example, TaskRabbit, you will find American company which offers many kind of different tasks, so not just taxi services. And it's kind of illustrative case on platform economy. So then, if this time is no different, some kind of methodological starting point might be look to not the average content of all jobs, but the task content of individual jobs. So how people have actually reported the tasks they are doing in their jobs. I shared with you, I don't know if anybody has read it, but a relatively good article by David Order, who is representing this school, and according to his analysis, tasks within each occupation vary greatly. So we can have example, for example, secretary. Everybody knows that secretary doesn't mean every time the same tasks for every person. Well, Arndt, Gregory and Tiran employed this approach this year in their study, and according to their estimates, just 9% of jobs on average are at high risk of being automated in OECD countries. In Finland the number was just 7%, so there is a pretty big difference with the another methodology, the job occupation-based approach, which I presented earlier. Even though just 9% of jobs are at high risk of being automated, the task content may change drastically. And according to study, McKinsey study from 2015, even half of current tasks can be automated already using current technology. And again, this is one methodological starting point, but mostly the arguments are at more theoretical level and not based on as sophisticated analysis. I think the most important argument against why this time is, or for why this time is no different, is historical evidence and false prophets. Many scholars for 200 years have been warning that technology will have negative effects on employment already. David Ricardo, Karl Marx, John Maynard Keynes. Many scholars in the 1960s, Jeremy Rifkin was big name in the 1990s, he still is commenting on this issue often, and he has quite a lot of political power too. But yes, this historical evidence, long-term effects have been positive in the end, and also we have had already many false prophets during the 200 years. Well, the basic logic based on quite neoclassical economics is that if productivity increases due to the new technologies, it leads into declining prices and expansion of innovation-based sectors, which translates into new demand for labor. And another important argument is, of course, if we use this task-based approach, it suggests that more cooperation with machines will be the new normal, and not that just job destruction. So, and also that occupation may reorganize. So if we have now two different jobs, they may become one job later or one occupation later. According to my analysis, also political and social factors, regulation, organizational structures, even faltering technological development should be taken into account when analyzing the long-term effects, and I think these factors are part of this time is no different scenario. Also, one can ask, does weak aggregate demand, so if we have unstable economy like now, does it have any, do firms have any incentives to invest in new technologies? Also, austerity policies carried out, for example, in Finland, if we have huge cuts in education, research and development, can we expect to see any new innovations? We know that the states have played a big role behind many technological innovations. Mariana Mazzucato uses always iPhone as an example. We know the GPS, touchscreen, almost all technology in smartphones are funded by state research. So, what are the implications? Of course, these are kind of ideal models, and how I see the situation is some kind of synthesis which tries to have moderate analysis on both these scenarios, and then suggest some moderate recommendations how to react to the changes. Well, if we follow this time is different ideal scenario, we can expect mass unemployment, harsh competition over the jobs left, and due to the harsh competition, also declining salaries, unstable economy, increase in inequality, which is one factor that many commentators, especially in the US, have been warning. And if inequality increases, it may translate also into breaking social cohesion. If we follow the trends which have been going on since the last decades, also one answer for this would be in-depth households. So the consumption would be more debt-led. And of course these all issues have also some kind of effect on social social indicators, and for sure there would be more social issues if this scenario would materialize. And for this group of people who are expecting this scenario, usually the first choice or first policy recommendation has been basic income. Also, other people have been arguing for basic income, but especially these people who are expecting these outcomes of digital economy are suggesting basic income. Well then, if we have this another ideal model, now we see that the outcomes are also fundamentally different. So we might expect just technological unemployment just in the short or mid-term, let's say from 1 to 10 years. Better jobs, we wouldn't have any boring, predictable routine jobs, just creative, so hanging out with people kind of jobs. And also if productivity grows, the outcome would be growing salaries. And if we think these are the outcomes, then we should recommend educations, just like during the earlier industrial revolutions, when electricity, for example, was breaking the old structures of employment. Well then, my scenario or my critical evaluation, I think what I want to emphasize is that interaction between technology, macroeconomics, social and political players is a crucial factor. So I don't believe that just technology itself will lead to some crucial changes in labor markets. And due to this, I argue that assessing the risk in the long term is inaccurate, no matter what kind of analysis you can offer. However, since at the technological level we know that many tasks or even jobs can be automated, I argue that at the very least short-term and mid-term disruptions in labor markets are expected. I myself, I wouldn't recommend to exclude also the other scenarios. If we think about drivers, and if the new driving technologies are popping out soon, it may mean that we have a large group of people who don't actually have any jobs left if we can automate something like driving. Well, it's just a basic logic that if unemployment increases just in short or mid-term, it means, of course, more harsh competition on the jobs. And this is expected to lead in the decline in salaries. And since we know that our current macroeconomic situation is unstable, I also argue that even smaller disruptions would create major challenges at both micro and macro level of the economy. So one of the biggest risks at a macroeconomic level is, of course, a vicious cycle. If people earn less income, it translates into less consumption, and it means also less profits for businesses. And in this kind of environment, firms do not invest and people change their consumption in relation to their expectation of long-term incomes, which is so-called permanent income hypothesis. Well, as I mentioned, the consumption based on private debt might be expected solution in our financialized economy, but it's not sustainable strategy if future financial crises are to be prevented. We know that already in the current system, Deutsche Bank, for example, is looking pretty, the situation is looking pretty serious. So I don't see that we could have any more debt-led consumption structures. Well, if the digital production is more capital intensive, as many argue, the risk might be increasing inequality, and we know, according to many studies, that growing inequality has also had negative effects on macroeconomy. So again, more unstable situation. It seems that I have the same point 2 times, but that's okay. So how to design digital working life policies if we follow my critical evaluation or my scenario? So my thesis is that if technological unemployment and precarious jobs increase even in the short or mid-term, social policy should be connected to labor market policies more closely. So this is my general level analysis. And critical point, which I also discuss next, is how can macroeconomic stability and labor market flexibility be secured in a socially sustainable manner. And since this is a basic income course, I'm asking today especially how basic income address this question. Firstly, I will analyze macroeconomic stability and basic income, and then flexibility, but it is necessary to note the other half of basic income arguments have been more or less revolutionary, which are not trying to just answer these problems, which are based on my moderate critical evaluation, but which are seeing digital working life or digital economy some sort of opportunity to criticize the whole current labor market paradigm. So the basic problem, which is quite logical, that even though productivity might grow, since we need less human labor for some activities, someone needs to buy the products. And the argument, not just in this context, but it has been also in some other contexts during the past decades, is that basic income guarantees sufficient purchase power for people. Well, in to do so, basic income needs to increase disposable income of people. So if we dilute the current level of social security, if we had, let's say in Finland, if we had 300 euros basic income a month, it would not increase disposable income. But then if we had 1,000 euros, then the case was different. So the first option is, of course, increasing the level of social security. Secondly, basic income might also make work always pay. This is a really important argument in Finland. As I mentioned, Finnish politicians usually argue that work should be made always pay, and basic income is the key for that. Third choice is that basic income improves workers' negotiation power over the employment relations. Well, the first choice, so giving people more money than currently, but now unconditionally and universally, according to our micro simulations, so calculation based on micro data, unfortunately show that this is quite expensive choice. If we like to implement budget neutral basic income of 1,000 euros, it would require 60% flat rate tax, which is relatively high in comparison to the current taxation in Finland. So I think this is a difficult option to address this problem of sufficient purchase power. So, does basic income make work always pay? So does it remove the disincentives in social security? Not in coherent way. Again, according to our microsimulations, it might make work more affordable in some income groups, but not in all. Especially lone parents are a difficult group. How can we, if we pay them less than currently, that's problematic socially. But then if we have higher level or the same level basic income as the current basic security benefits, then it doesn't actually make work incentives that much better. I don't have any tables here, but if you're interested in those, you can mail me and I can send you many, and also recommend to have a look at our English preliminary report on how to test basic income in Finland. You can, if you Google it, I think you will find it on web. It's approximately 60 pages. Well, does basic income improve workers' negotiation power? So would workers get more money from the greedy employers if they had basic income? According to my analysis, since basic income doesn't have any sanctions for unemployed people, or you can resign your jobs without getting any sanctions, I think if we didn't dilute the current level of social security, basic income would give more power for precarious workers to negotiate on the employment contracts. Well, but there are also other opinions. For example, Jürgen de Wiesbader, who's organizing this course, has written a paper with, I think it was with Simon Birnbaum, about this issue, and if I remember correct, they are arguing that this may not be always the case. So there are also different opinions on this point. So I argue basic income as a macroeconomic stabilizer has serious limitations. However, I think if funding options are revised, our microsimulations are based on income taxation. Then, if we revise these options, maybe we could increase the level of social security, or even make work always pay. Maybe some kind of robot taxes, functional finance, which is heterodox idea, but it means that maybe central banks could fund straight some kind of social benefits, or any kind of now that I think I took this functional finance here, since a discussion on quantitative easing for people has been pretty active in many countries, which means that the quantitative easing should mean that the central banks use their money for normal people, not funding banks as they're doing currently. So if we are revising funding options, then perhaps. Labor market flexibility. This is something which is emphasized, I think, both of these groups. So both who are thinking this time is different, this time is no different. And what this means, normally labor market flexibility has meant, not always, but many times more sanctions and more activation for unemployed people. But how I see labor market flexibility is that how to make it easier to change your jobs, easier, educate yourself at the same time when you're having paid job, etc. So the argument, really common argument in basic income discussion, not just in digital economy discussion, is basic income increases labor market flexibility. So how might the flexibility increase? Well, firstly, of course, I think you had already some sort of introduction introduction lectures, so you might already know that basic income doesn't have any means or income testing, which means that you don't need to report or you don't have any delays receiving your social benefit in basic income in this case, which is expected to be an incentive to work as a part-time basis or go into self-employment, so less bureaucracy traps, as we call them in Finland quite often. Also a really common argument is that the basic income would be an incentive for entrepreneurship. This is also quite logical that you have less risk. It's kind of startup grant, modern startup grant. Again, less bureaucracy, more flexible process, and more stable, of course. European Union has been talking about lifelong learning for decades. I don't think that they have made any real contributions how to guarantee that people have the opportunity for lifelong learning. But I think this kind of student grant, like basic income, could guarantee that people actually can choose to study when they need to do it according to their own analysis. So I argue that basic income would be more flexible than the current means-tested systems and address the flexibility problem quite well. However, it is necessary to know that basic income may not be the only option. We might fix the table rate, so how much different benefits are diminishing when you start work, or increase your workload. We might have also different kind of tax credit schemes, or just less means and income testing. This is not an on-off situation. Then, of course, it's another question: would these reforms increase flexibility enough, or would it be just more bureaucracy and just slightly more flexible system? So then, the revolutionary arguments for basic income in this context. These are not actually anymore trying to answer my question how to guarantee more or stable macroeconomy and labor market flexibility. These are trying to find answers how to construct the labor market totally again and fundamentally. Many visionaries, again, not just in the digital economy context, have been arguing that basic income would enable to shorten work hours and redistribute work in more equal manner. And if you start to follow this discussion more closely, you will see that everybody is quoting John Maynard Keynes' essay from 1930, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, in which he argued that in 2030 we will have just 3 hours working days and the economic problem is solved. So it means basically that the productivity has grown so much that people don't need to work that much as in 1930. Well, in the light of history, of course, the whole industrial capitalism has meant a trend of diminishing working hours. So this is nothing that radical. And also some experiments. In Sweden they actually have now some 6 hours experiments in southern Sweden, or some, I think it was nurses. Preliminary results have been quite positive. So I would say that this combination is reasonable in many senses, especially in social senses. And I think that practically, in a practical manner, it would be low-paid jobs, which might be the easiest choice to redistribute. And then, if people start to work as a part-time basis in order to redistribute the work, it means that basic income would guarantee advocate income for these people. I think for this question, and why I think this is a revolutionary argument for basic income in the context of digital economy, is the mainstream economists oppose the idea, since it threatens competitiveness. It makes work more expensive. Well, at the same time, we should think that if we start to redistribute work at state level, it would be also some sort of social question, and perhaps state should anyhow subsidize this project, either with basic income or with some other benefits. And okay, also in Finland we still have this kind of Sabbath year system that people with longer working career can have some break with their job, and the job will be given for a unemployed person, or a young person, or long-term unemployed person. So even in the current system we have this sort of schemes, even though there have been some cuts also on this scheme in Finland. Anyhow, I argue that there are serious political obstacles to combine redistribution of work and basic income. So then, even more philosophical argument, reconceptualizing work. This is also a long discussion. Gross domestic product has been criticized for decades as an inadequate indicator of welfare. Especially feminists have been arguing that this indicator doesn't measure domestic work or any other kind of informal work. But now, also in addition to this criticism, there's growing digital criticism. I call it digital criticism. It's not any official concept. I use this. Good example, digital economy means that we may copy things easy. Knowledge become not abundant, which means that it can be shared easily. It may increase welfare easily, but it may not be measured by gross domestic product. So I think this is a criticism which should be taken seriously. Well, the argument of how to combine reconceptualizing work and basic income is that basic income would enable, in addition to paid jobs, participating in cooperatives, so this sort of social entrepreneurship, voluntary work, peer production, normal cases Wikipedia or other kind of peer production, independent knowledge or culture work. These sort of activities might flourish if basic income was implemented. So basic income would be a pay for unpaid work. This is a really common argument you will find if you start to follow this discussion more closely. This comes also pretty near to the idea of participation income, popularized by Anthony Atkinson, British economist. Participation income basically means that the people could participate in society, for example via volunteering or taking care of their parents or kids or whatsoever. So it would kind of reconceptualize work in comparison to the current paradigm. One important question is, of course, what would happen for the gender roles. Would this kind of framing mean that it would be male workers who would still participate in official labor markets, and women would stay at home taking care of children and other this sort of weak groups. Or yes. Well, this is a more empirical question, and I think this is something that should be studied when in the basic income experiments, and hopefully we will get some results on this via these experiments. I also argue that if insecurity increases in labor markets, as I have argued, it is probable that people become active outside paid employment. So I think these are pretty probable ways how people may activate themselves if paid jobs become scarce. Paid jobs have institutional status in our current societies, at least in Western welfare states. And I'm not sure if there is any choice for this laborist trap, which is concept by Guy Standing, a prominent basic income advocate and scholar. I think the current political powers and structures do not support this kind of thinking of reconceptualizing work. But then, I think next slide is, some conclusions. As I've already argued, I think basic income does not automatically stabilize economy, according to my analysis, but could increase labor market flexibility. However, I also think that basic income is not the only option to increase flexibility, even though it might be the best option. And that is that I think this argument may not increase basic income's political feasibility. Well, then these revolutionary arguments of redistribution of work and reconceptualizing work, I think they are relevant if, and just if, unemployment increases substantially and or the economic problem will be solved. So if everybody sees that there is substantially less need for human labor, then why on earth we should reproduce this slavery's trap? Why everyone should have their job? So I think that these revolutionary arguments become relevant, but just in the case if unemployment increases or something really drastic happens in labor markets. So basically, if this time is different, scenario becomes reality. So I think, even though my analysis, I want to emphasize that my analysis is just preliminary and it may have some holes, and feel free to criticize anything what I've said today, but I think almost everybody would agree with me that the discussion itself on these implications of the digital economy for labor has made basic income politically more feasible option, even though I think it's not the only option. It's always good to finish your presentation quoting someone wiser than you, so today I have John Maynard Keynes. I think he has good point. This is from the preface of General Theory, which is his most famous book. I think this point should be also understood when talking or discussing digital economy. So the difficulty lies not in the new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones. And I shall finish here. Thank you.